I talked with Indiana Congressman Jim Banks about the bill he's introduced to reopen our schools. Take a look. Congressman, great to see you. We've been through the arguments about why it's so important for schools to reopen properly in the fall. The question is, how do we make that happen? You've got a bill designed to try and make that happen. Can you just talk us through how that would work?
Yeah, Steve, the Reopen Our Schools Act is simple. It provides schools with what they're asking for, liability protections, but at the same time, it prevents federal funding to going to schools who don't reopen in the fall. Also, I carve out an opportunity for schools to seek a waiver through the Federal Department of Education if they have unique circumstances. But, Steve, across the board, what I'm hearing from schools in my district and throughout America is there is a safe and responsible way to get this done. Over 80% of parents who are surveyed in almost every school district in my district tell schools that they want their kids to go back to the classroom 5 days a week. But to give an option to the rest of those students or families for a virtual option, that's the way most schools are going. But you still have school districts like in New York and California who are failing to provide the leadership at all to get their schools reopened. And if they don't, there should be repercussions for that. We should look at withholding federal funding, grants like for school safety, where you have to ask the question, why does a school need a school safety federal grant if they don't reopen their doors in the fall? That's the question that my bill, the Reopen Our Schools Act, is asking.
Mm-hmm. Great. Let's just look at the different parts of that. First of all, on the funding, that's something the President has been talking about this week as well. I just want to be clear, what's the mechanism for withholding funding? Is it something that resides with the President, the executive branch, Betsy DeVos, and the Department? What's the role of Congress? How do those fit together?
Yeah, Steve, gets into a larger conversation that I love to have about why we have a federal Department of Education to begin with. But we do, yes. and a big part of the funding that is funneled through the Federal Department of Education goes to schools at the state and local level through federal grants. Now, you and I both know that the vast majority of funding for our schools comes from state and local taxes, but the growing role of the federal government in education means more and more federal grants involved. In fact, we've surveyed a number of these grants and looked at the vast amount of dollars that flow from the federal government to schools through federal grants, and it is an endless list of federal grants. So the mechanism that the federal government has in entering in and wading into this discussion is to ask the question, if schools don't reopen in the fall, why do they need access to all of these federal funds? Now, again, most of the dollars at risk that schools need to reopen or be functioning at all come from state and local governments. And I'll point to Florida as an example of a state that the governor of Florida has mandated that every school will reopen in the fall 5 days a week, and that their state funding will be at risk if they don't. I want to have the same conversation at the federal level related to federal grants.
So let's just look at so actually, before we move on to that, I just want to be really clear. So is it the case that your bill would require the federal government to do this? Is that how that would work?
Well, my bill states that if a school doesn't go back to in-the-classroom instruction as they provided it before COVID-19, then they would potentially risk federal funding grants. They could petition the Secretary of Education under unique circumstances to provide those federal grants. But taxpayers and parents are asking the question and begging to know the answer to that question. If a school doesn't reopen and educate my child, which I'm paying taxpayer dollars so that they can do that, then why should those schools receive those funds?
Well, I totally agree with that point. I'm sure many watching will as well. Congressman, thank you so much for your work on this. I think we're all cheering you on. Also, just want to note you do fantastic work on China, and hope we can get you on to talk about that at some point in the near future. Good to see you tonight.
Thank you, Steve. Good to be with you.